When I lost my hearing aid, I asked for help. My daughter-in-law sneered, "Maybe it's a sign you should stop talking." My son said, "It's been hard with you around." That night, I sat alone on the porch as rain poured, listening to them laugh inside. But they didn't know my lawyer had been monitoring every transaction in the house, and one record exposed something that would. "Maybe it's a sign you should stop talking." Those words hit me like a physical blow as I stood there in my own son's living room, dripping wet from searching the garden in the rain, my hearing aid lost somewhere in this house that used to feel like sanctuary. Leora didn't even look at me when she said it, just kept folding laundry with those sharp, precise movements of hers, each snap of fabric punctuating her contempt. Elias sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, and I waited for him to defend me, to say something, anything, but he just shrugged without looking up and said, "It's been hard with you around, Mom." The casual cruelty of it made my chest tighten. I'm Irene Valdez, 68 years old, and I used to run my own accounting firm with ruthless precision, commanding respect from clients and colleagues alike. But somewhere along the way I got soft, got trusting, started believing that blood meant loyalty, and that retirement meant I could finally relax and let someone else take the reins. My fatal flaw has always been that once I decide to trust someone, I trust them completely, blindly, ignoring every red flag, because confrontation makes my stomach turn, and I'd rather pretend everything is fine than face ugly truths. I signed over partial control of my assets to Elias 6 months ago when I moved in with them, actually believing his promises that this would make everything easier, that we were family and families help each other. I stood there blinking back tears, pretending I hadn't fully heard what they said even though I had, and I turned away slowly, making my way to the porch where the rain was still coming down in sheets. The cold water soaked through my shawl as I sat on the wooden bench, and I didn't care. I just sat there listening to the sound of their laughter drifting through the window behind me, muffled but unmistakable, and something inside me went very cold and very still. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out with shaking hands, squinting at the screen. A message from Hugo Ramirez, my lawyer. "Irene, we need to talk urgently. I've noticed unusual activity in your accounts. Call me as soon as possible." My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and suddenly the rain, their words, the lost hearing aid, everything crystallized into a single sharp point of clarity that cut through all my willful blindness. I didn't confront them that night or the next day or the day after that. Instead, I did something I should have done weeks ago when I first felt that prickle of unease watching Leora go through my mail, when I first noticed Elias asking pointed questions about my property holdings. I started paying attention. Without my hearing aid, they assumed I couldn't follow their conversations, couldn't hear them when they thought I'd gone to bed early or was out in the garden. They grew careless, speaking openly in the kitchen while I sat in the adjacent room, or talking in lowered voices that they thought were quiet enough. My obsessive nature, the same trait that made me check and recheck every ledger 3 times when I was working, that made my employees roll their eyes at my perfectionism, came roaring back to life. I began waking at 5 in the morning, pulling out my old files, my records, everything I'd kept from my accounting days. I reviewed documents with the same meticulous attention I used to give to complex audits, and I saw patterns that made my blood run cold. I stopped eating regular meals, surviving on coffee and crackers as I pored over statements, and I knew I was falling back into that unhealthy pattern of obsession that used to worry my late husband, but I couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. I called Hugo back and asked him to come to the house when I knew Elias and Leora would be at work. He arrived looking concerned, his salt and pepper hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it, carrying a briefcase that seemed heavier than usual. "Irene," he said as soon as I let him in, "I've been reviewing everything like you asked, and I need you to sit down for this." We sat at the kitchen table and he spread documents in front of me, pointing with his pen at highlighted sections. "Funds have been transferred from your main accounts. Small amounts at first, 500 here, 1,000 there, but in the last month it's escalated. 20,000 was moved just last week." I felt dizzy. "Where did it go?" "That's the concerning part. The transfers were authorized using your power of attorney designation, but they're going into accounts that I can't fully trace yet. There's also been activity on your property titles. Someone's been preparing paperwork to shift ownership through what looks like a series of legal but questionable transactions." My hands started shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. "Elias has power of attorney. I gave it to him when I moved in." Hugo's expression was pained. "I advised against that at the time, remember? I suggested keeping me as your attorney in fact, but you insisted." He was right, and that made it worse. My stubborn streak, my absolute conviction that I knew best once I'd made up my mind, had led me straight into this trap. "What can we do?" "We need evidence of intent, Irene. Right now, technically, everything being done is within the legal parameters of the power of attorney you granted, but if we can prove manipulation or undue influence, we can challenge it." I thought about that for a long moment, my accountant's brain clicking through options and scenarios. Then I remembered something from my old office days when we'd had to deal with embezzlement. "I need to record them," I said. "I need proof of what they're planning." Hugo hesitated. In this state, you're legally allowed to record conversations in your own home. But Irene, are you sure you want to go down this road? This is your son. He stopped being my son when he decided I was just an asset to liquidate, I said, and I meant it, even though part of me was screaming inside. That afternoon, I went to an electronics store and bought a small voice-activated recorder, the kind that looks like a USB drive. My hands were sweating as I paid for it, and I felt simultaneously powerful and sick to my stomach. I was crossing a line, spying on my own family, but what choice did they leave me? That evening, I placed the recorder on the bookshelf in the living room, tucked behind a photo frame where it wouldn't be noticed. Then I pretended to go to bed early, climbing the stairs to my room but leaving my door cracked open so I could hear when they started talking. It didn't take long. I heard Leora's voice first, sharp and impatient. Did you talk to the real estate attorney about the Oak Street property? Elias mumbled something I couldn't quite catch, and she snapped, you need to handle this faster. Every day we wait is money sitting there doing nothing. It's complicated, Leora. The title has to be transferred properly or it'll raise flags. Then make it uncomplicated. Your mother isn't going to last forever, and I'm not spending the next decade waiting for our inheritance. My breath caught. Our inheritance, like I was already dead. Elias said, she's healthier than you think, could be around for years. Which is exactly why we need to move now while we still have power of attorney. Once the last property clears, we can start looking at facilities. There was a long pause, and then Elias said quietly, you mean like a nursing home? Obviously, she doesn't need to be here anymore. We've gotten what we needed from having her close. Now she's just in the way. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Tears were streaming down my face, but I forced myself to stay silent to listen. She's still my mother, Leora. Then act like it, she spat, and stop being so weak. She built a fortune and she's been draining it away on nothing. We're securing our future, our children's future. If you can't see that, then you're as useless as she is. I heard footsteps and scrambled back from the door, climbing into bed fully clothed and pulling the covers up. But sleep didn't come that night. I lay there in the dark, replaying their words over and over, and each repetition hurt less while making my resolve harder. By morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. Over the next 2 weeks, I collected recordings. I documented every conversation, every mention of my accounts, my properties, their plans. I met with Hugo 3 more times, always when they were out. And we built a case file that grew thicker each day. My obsessive nature took over completely. I barely slept, existing on maybe 4 hours a night, and I stopped bothering with meals beyond whatever I could eat standing at the counter. Marable Cruz, my neighbor who sometimes brought over casseroles, knocked on the door one afternoon looking worried. Irene, honey, you look terrible. Are you feeling okay? I forced a smile. Just tired, Marable, you know how it is. She studied me with those sharp eyes of hers. Is everything all right with Elias and Leora? I've noticed some tension. For a moment I almost told her everything, but my instinct to hide problems, to pretend everything was fine, kicked in. We are fine, just adjusting to living together. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push, just squeezed my hand and left. I regretted not confiding in her immediately because isolation was another of my flaws, thinking I had to handle everything alone, but it was too late to change course now. I reviewed the recordings obsessively, transcribing them word for word, highlighting the most damaging sections. One conversation in particular stood out. Leora had been on the phone with someone, probably another attorney, discussing accelerating the timeline and minimizing the old woman's involvement in decision-making. She'd actually laughed when the person on the other end said something I couldn't hear and replied, "Trust me, she won't fight it. She's too passive, always has been. This will be easy." That word passive burned into my brain. She was right, I had been passive, had spent the last 6 months swallowing my discomfort and doubt rather than standing up for myself. But I wasn't going to be passive anymore. Hugo and I filed the necessary paperwork to freeze my accounts and revoke the power of attorney. It took some maneuvering because Elias technically had the authority to contest it, but Hugo found a provision that allowed for emergency revocation if there was evidence of potential financial exploitation. The day the freeze went through, I felt a surge of triumph followed immediately by terror. This was it, the point of no return. That evening I asked Elias and Leora to sit down for dinner, something we rarely did anymore. Leora looked annoyed. "I have plans tonight." "Cancel them," I said, and something in my tone made her eyes narrow. We sat at the dining room table and I placed my hearing aid in the center, right next to the salt shaker. "I found it," I said calmly. "Found what?" Elias asked, looking confused. "My hearing aid. It was in the bathroom cabinet." Funny thing is, once I put it back in, I started hearing all sorts of interesting things. The color drained from Elias' face. Leora's expression went carefully blank. "I also found something else," I continued, sliding a thick manila folder across the table. "Financial records, transaction histories, and transcripts of your conversations about my assets, my properties, and your plans to warehouse me in a facility." Leora recovered first, her face hardening. "You recorded us." "That's illegal. Actually, in this state, I'm perfectly within my rights to record conversations in my own home." My lawyer confirmed it. I kept my voice steady even though my heart was racing. Did you really go through our private conversations? Elias stammered. Private? You were discussing my finances, my property, my future. That involves me. There's nothing private about it. Leora stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. We've been helping you manage your affairs because you're getting older and making mistakes. If you're too paranoid to appreciate that, sit down, I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended, sharp enough to make her freeze. She sat, but her eyes were blazing with anger. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Let's start with the unauthorized transfers. $27,000 moved from my main account over the last 6 weeks. Would you like to explain that, Elias? He couldn't meet my eyes. That was for household expenses, for taking care of you. Household expenses don't require secret transfers to offshore accounts. I pulled out another page. Then there's the property on Oak Street. You've been preparing to transfer the title to a shell company that you control. We were trying to protect your assets, Leora interjected. Protect them from what? From me. I felt my anger rising, that quick temper I'd always struggled to control starting to boil over. You wanted to protect them right into your own pockets. You don't understand business, Irene. We were making smart investments. Don't you dare patronize me, I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. I ran a successful accounting firm for 30 years. I understand business better than you ever will. What I understand now is that you saw a trusting old woman and decided to rob her blind. Elias finally spoke up, his voice shaking. Mom, we weren't trying to rob you, we just thought. You thought I'd be too passive to notice, too grateful for a place to live to question anything, too deaf to hear you planning my future like I was already dead. The words came out bitter and harsh, and I saw him flinch. Good. Let him feel a fraction of the pain I felt. We can fix this, he said desperately. We can move the money back, we can. You can't fix this, Elias, it's already done. I pulled out the legal documents. As of this morning, all my accounts have been frozen pending investigation. The power of attorney you held has been revoked. I filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding potential financial exploitation of an elderly person. Leora's face went pale. You're filing charges against your own son. I'm protecting myself from thieves. The fact that one of them is my son just makes it more painful, not less criminal. My voice cracked on that last word, betraying the emotion I was trying to suppress. Elias stood up and I saw tears in his eyes. Mom, please, I know we made mistakes, but this will destroy us. Leora could lose her job, I could lose my license. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me. I felt no satisfaction in seeing him cry, only a hollow ache that this was what our relationship had become. You let her talk you into this, I said, gesturing at Leora. You let her convince you that I was just an obstacle, just money waiting to be claimed. That's not. It is exactly what happened. I heard the recordings, Elias. I heard her call me useless. I heard you agree to put me in a facility so you could liquidate my assets faster. Leora stood up again, and this time I didn't stop her. You know what? Fine, you want to play the victim, go ahead, but you were always going to end up alone. You're controlling, you're paranoid, and you can't let anyone make decisions without second-guessing them. I second-guess thieves, I shot back. That's just good sense. We're not thieves. We're family who got tired of dealing with a bitter old woman who can't accept help. Her words stung because part of me wondered if she was right, if my suspicious nature had made me see malice where there was only misguided help. But then I remembered the recordings, the numbers, the evidence that didn't lie. Help doesn't involve secret accounts and forged signatures, I said quietly. Get out, both of you. You have until the end of the week to find somewhere else to live. Elias looked stricken. This is our house, Mom. You're living with us. Check the deed, I said. I never transferred ownership. This house is still in my name. I allowed you to live here, and now I'm withdrawing that permission. You have until Friday. The next few days were a blur of legal proceedings and cold silence. Leora packed her things within 24 hours and left without saying goodbye, moving in with her sister across town. Elias stayed, moving through the house like a ghost, trying to talk to me several times, but I couldn't bear to hear his excuses. Hugo kept me updated on the investigation. The State Attorney General's office had taken an interest in the case, especially after they found additional irregularities in how the power of attorney had been used. There were signatures on documents I'd never seen, approvals for transactions I'd never authorized. They built a pretty sophisticated scheme, Hugo told me during one of our meetings. If you hadn't caught it when you did, they could have drained everything within another 6 months. I felt sick knowing how close I'd come to losing everything I'd worked my entire life to build. My stubbornness and pride had almost been my downfall, trusting Elias just because he was my son, ignoring every warning sign because admitting I'd been fooled was too painful. Now I was facing the consequences of that willful blindness. The financial damage was significant. Between the transfers they'd already made and the legal fees I was incurring to fight back, I'd lost close to $50,000. Some of it might be recoverable, but Hugo warned me not to count on it. These cases are complicated. Even with the evidence you have, proving criminal intent versus mismanagement is difficult. I didn't care about criminal charges, not really. What I cared about was making sure they couldn't do this to anyone else. On Thursday evening, Elias knocked on my bedroom door. I was sitting at my desk, going through more paperwork, and I almost didn't answer. "Mom, please, can we talk?" I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked terrible, unshaven and red-eyed like he hadn't slept in days. "I know I messed up," he started. "I know I let Leora influence me and I made terrible choices. But you're my mother, I love you, doesn't that count for anything?" I wanted to scream at him that love wasn't stealing, that love wasn't planning to institutionalize someone for convenience, but I kept my voice level. "Love without respect is nothing, Elias. You didn't respect me enough to be honest. You didn't respect my intelligence, my autonomy, or my right to make my own decisions. I was trying to help secure your future. By stealing my present, don't insult me with more lies." I felt my temper flaring again and took a deep breath. "Made your choices, now you live with them. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have the money for a deposit on a new place, not with everything frozen. That's not my problem anymore." The words came out colder than I intended, and I saw him recoil like I'd slapped him. Part of me wanted to take it back, to tell him I'd help him figure it out, because that's what mothers do, but I couldn't. I couldn't keep enabling him, keep rescuing him from the consequences of his own actions. That had been my pattern my whole life, swooping in to fix his problems, and look where it had gotten us. By Friday morning, Elias was gone. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter that I couldn't bring myself to read, just folded it up and stuck it in a drawer. The house felt enormous and empty without them, echoing with silence that pressed against my ears even with my hearing aid in. Marable came by that afternoon, bringing soup and concern. "I heard Elias and Leora moved out. Are you okay?" I broke down then, standing in my kitchen with this woman who was barely more than an acquaintance, sobbing into her shoulder while she held me and made soothing sounds. When I finally pulled myself together, I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more shocked with each detail. "Oh honey," she said when I finished. "I'm so sorry, but you did the right thing, you protected yourself." "Did I?" I wiped my eyes. "He's my son. Maybe I should have tried to work it out, given him another chance. He had chances. He chose to betray those chances." She took my hand. "You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, not even your child." Her words helped, but they didn't fill the hole in my chest where my family used to be. The investigation continued over the following weeks. The Attorney General's office found enough evidence to file civil charges against both Elias and Leora for financial exploitation and fraud. Criminal charges were still being considered, but Hugo explained that prosecutors were cautious about criminal cases involving family members unless there was absolutely ironclad evidence of intent. I spent my days reorganizing my finances, working with Hugo to recover what could be recovered and secure what remained. My obsessive nature served me well here, documenting everything, creating systems and safeguards that would prevent this from ever happening again. But at night, lying alone in my too big house, I felt the weight of my choices. I'd been right to protect myself, I knew that, but being right didn't make it hurt less. I kept thinking about Elias as a little boy, how he used to climb into my lap and ask me to explain numbers to him, how proud I'd been when he'd gone to college, when he'd gotten married. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost that boy, or maybe he'd just grown into someone I didn't recognize. My lawyer called me one afternoon with news that made my stomach drop. "Irene, I need to tell you something about the investigation. They found evidence that this wasn't the first time Elias and Leora tried this scheme. There are at least 2 other elderly individuals they approached with similar financial arrangements before you. One of them lost everything. I felt like I'd been punched. What? The pattern is clear. They target older people with assets but no close family supervision, gain their trust, obtain power of attorney, and systematically drain their accounts. You caught them earlier than the others did, which is why you still have most of your assets. My son was a con artist, a predator who targeted vulnerable elderly people. The realization made me physically ill. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, trying to reconcile the child I'd raised with the man who'd done these things. That night I made a decision. I called Hugo and asked him to come over the next morning. When he arrived, I had papers ready. "I want to change my will," I said. "Everything that was designated for Elias I want redirected." Hugo looked concerned. "Are you sure? This is a big step, Irene." "I've never been more sure of anything." I pushed the papers toward him. "I want my estate to fund a legal aid organization for elderly abuse victims. People who are being exploited by family members or caretakers and don't have the resources to fight back." He studied me for a long moment. "This is going to hurt him, Irene, even more than the investigation." "Good," I said, and I meant it. He needs to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people like assets to be liquidated and expect to profit from them in the end. We spent the next few hours drafting the new will. Everything I owned, everything I'd worked for, would go toward helping people in situations like mine. The house, the remaining properties, the investment accounts, all of it. Elias would get nothing. Not because I wanted revenge exactly, though I won't lie and say that wasn't part of it, but because I couldn't stomach the idea of him benefiting from the same assets he'd tried to steal. Hugo drafted the documents with his usual meticulous care, and I signed them feeling both powerful and heartbroken. There's one more thing, I said. I want you to send him a copy once it's filed. I want him to know. That's unusual. Most people keep their will private until death. I don't care about usual. I want him to understand what he's lost. Not just money, but my trust, my respect, everything that should have been his inheritance as my son. Hugo nodded slowly. All right, I'll send it certified mail once everything is processed. 2 weeks later, Hugo called to tell me the new will had been filed and a copy sent to Elias. I waited by the phone, some part of me expecting him to call, to rage or beg or apologize. But he didn't. Days passed in silence. The only contact I had was through lawyers as the civil case moved forward. The Attorney General's office was building a strong case, Hugo assured me, and there would likely be settlements or judgments that would force Elias and Leora to repay what they'd taken, possibly more in damages. But the money didn't matter as much as I thought it would. What mattered was the principle, the justice of it. A month after I'd changed my will, Maribel stopped by with news. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Elias and Leora separated. She filed for divorce. I felt a strange mix of emotions, satisfaction that their partnership in crime had crumbled, but also sadness because I'd liked Leora once, had welcomed her into our family and imagined her as the daughter I'd never had. How is Elias doing? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Maribel's expression was sympathetic. Not well from what I hear. He's living in a studio apartment on the east side, lost his job when the investigation became public. He's pretty isolated. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant hearing that, wanted to believe he was getting exactly what he deserved, but instead I just felt hollow. This was my son, broken and alone, and even knowing what he'd done, I couldn't find joy in his suffering. 3 months after the confrontation, I was sitting on my porch one evening, watching the sunset and thinking about everything that had happened, when a car pulled into my driveway. Elias got out slowly, looking thinner than I remembered, older somehow. My first instinct was to go inside and lock the door, but I stayed put, waiting to see what he wanted. He walked up the porch steps carefully, like he was afraid I might bolt. "Mom, I know you probably don't want to see me." His voice was hoarse, but I needed to tell you something. I didn't respond, just waited. "I got your new will. I know what you did, and I understand why. I deserve it." He sat down on the steps, not trying to get close to me. "I've been going to therapy, trying to figure out how I became someone who could do what I did. And I realized that I've been making excuses my whole life. Blaming Leora, blaming pressure, blaming everything except myself. I still didn't say anything. Words felt inadequate for the chasm between us. I'm not asking for forgiveness," he continued. "I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I see now what I did to you, what I became, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom." Tears were streaming down his face, and I felt my own eyes burning. "Sorry doesn't give me back what you took," I said quietly. "Not the money, the trust, the relationship. You took my son from me when you decided I was just an asset." "I know." His voice broke. "I know I can't fix it. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. I'm working with the Attorney General's office, cooperating fully with the investigation. I'm going to pay back everything, even if it takes the rest of my life." "It will take the rest of your life," I said, "and it still won't be enough." He nodded, accepting that. We sat in silence for a few minutes, and I thought about all the choices that had led us to this moment. My choice to trust blindly, his choice to betray that trust, the cascading consequences that had torn our family apart. "I'm still your mother," I finally said, and his head snapped up. "But I'm not going to rescue you from this. You made your choices, and you're going to live with them. If you want to rebuild some kind of relationship with me, it's going to be on my terms, with complete transparency, and it's going to take years." "I'll do whatever it takes," he said desperately. "Will you, though?" I looked at him hard. "Or will you just wait until I'm more vulnerable and try again?" "No, I swear. I don't trust your swears anymore, Elias. You're going to have to prove it through actions, not words." He stood up slowly. "Can I call you sometimes, just to check in?" I thought about that. Part of me wanted to say no, to cut him off completely and be done with it. But another part, the part that was still his mother despite everything, couldn't quite close that door all the way. "Once a month," I said. "You can call once a month. But if I sense any manipulation, any attempt to access my finances or influence my decisions, we're done. Completely and permanently." "I understand. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for even that much." He walked back to his car, and I watched him drive away, feeling exhausted and raw. The civil case wrapped up 6 months later. Elias and Leora were ordered to pay restitution of $73,000, covering what they'd taken plus damages and legal fees. Leora filed for bankruptcy almost immediately, trying to avoid payment, but the judgment was structured in a way that made it difficult to discharge. Elias set up a payment plan and sent the first check with a note that just said, "I'm sorry." I deposited it without responding. The criminal investigation eventually resulted in probation for both of them and community service, the prosecutor deciding that prison time wasn't warranted for first-time offenders in a financial crime case. I was disappointed but not surprised. The legal system is often more forgiving than the people who have been hurt, but there was one victory that mattered more than any court judgment. The legal aid organization I designated in my will learned about my story through Hugo, and they reached out to ask if I'd be willing to serve on their board. We work with elderly abuse victims, the director explained during our phone call. People who are being exploited by family members, caretakers, financial advisors. Your experience and your accounting background would be invaluable in helping us identify fraud and build cases. I said yes immediately. It gave me purpose, turned my painful experience into something that could help others. I started volunteering 3 days a week, reviewing financial documents for clients, helping them understand the patterns of exploitation, showing them they weren't alone or stupid for being victimized by people they trusted. Each case reminded me of my own story, but instead of making me bitter, it made me determined. I met people who'd lost everything to family members they'd trusted, who'd been isolated and gaslit until they questioned their own judgment. I saw my own flaws reflected in their stories, that tendency to trust too much, to ignore red flags, to choose comfort over confrontation. But I also saw strength and resilience, people who decided to fight back despite the pain of acknowledging betrayal. One woman I worked with, Margaret, had been systematically robbed by her daughter-in-law over the course of 5 years. By the time she realized what was happening, she'd lost her house, her savings, everything. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, she told me, crying in my office, because if I admitted what was happening, I'd have to admit that my family didn't love me. I held her hand and told her about Elias, about how I'd made the same mistakes, chosen the same willful blindness. But you caught it, I said. You're fighting back, that takes courage. Helping her build her case, watching her regain confidence and strength, gave me more satisfaction than any revenge ever could have. A year after the confrontation, I was working at the legal aid office when Hugo called. Irene, I have news. The Attorney General's office has opened a larger investigation based on the evidence from your case. They've identified at least 15 other victims of similar schemes, and several financial institutions are being scrutinized for failing to report suspicious activity. Are Elias and Leora involved in all of them? Not all, but several. It looks like they were part of a larger network of people who targeted elderly individuals with assets. The investigation is getting national attention. I felt a complex rush of emotions. Pride that my case had led to something bigger, that other victims might get justice. Grief that my son had been involved in something so extensive and predatory. Anger that I'd been so blind to who he really was. That evening, Elias called for his monthly check-in. We'd been doing these calls for several months now, stilted and awkward conversations where he updated me on his life, and I listened with careful distance. I saw the news about the expanded investigation, he said quietly. They contacted me about testifying. Are you going to? Yes, I'm cooperating fully. It's the least I can do. There was a long pause. Mom, I know I've said this before, but I need you to know that I'm not that person anymore. The therapy has helped me understand how I justified what I did, how I dehumanized the people I was hurting. Including me, I said, especially you. I convinced myself that I was entitled to your money because I was your son, that you owed me for all the years you worked instead of spending time with me. I blamed you for my own failures and told myself I was just taking what should have been mine anyway. His honesty was painful but necessary. And now I understand that your love and your money are two different things. That you didn't owe me your assets just because you were my mother. That I acted like a criminal and hurt you in ways that might never heal. I felt tears on my cheeks. You did hurt me. Every day I wake up and remember what you were willing to do to me, and it hurts all over again. I know, I live with that knowledge too, but I'm trying to be better, to help other people avoid becoming what I was. He'd started speaking at senior centers about financial exploitation, sharing his story as a warning. The Attorney General's office had asked him to participate in an educational campaign. It didn't absolve him, but it was something. I'm proud of the work you're doing with the legal aid organization, he added. I saw an article about it in the paper. You're helping people. I'm trying to make something good come from something terrible. We talked a little longer, and for the first time, the conversation felt almost natural, like maybe someday we could build something new from the ruins of what we'd had. But I wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy or quick. 2 years after I'd changed my will, I was at the legal aid office reviewing a particularly complex case when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Valdez, this is Detective Sarah Brennan with the state police. I'm calling about the investigation into financial exploitation rings. Your son Elias' testimony has been instrumental in breaking up a network that victimized over 40 people across 3 states. I sat down heavily. 40 people. Yes, ma'am. His cooperation has led to multiple arrests and significant asset recovery for victims. I wanted you to know that his testimony showed genuine remorse and has likely prevented many future victims. After we hung up, I sat staring at the wall, processing this information. Elias was genuinely trying to make amends, not through grand gestures or empty apologies, but through concrete actions that helped others. It didn't change what he'd done to me, but it changed how I saw his capacity for redemption. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I called him instead of waiting for his monthly call. Elias, I heard about the investigation, about your testimony. Mom, he sounded shocked to hear from me. I couldn't not do it. Those people deserve justice, and I know how the system works, how these schemes are structured. If I can help, I have to. I'm proud of you, I said, and I meant it. That doesn't erase what happened between us, but I'm proud of the person you're trying to become. He was crying, I could hear it in his voice. Thank you, that means more than you know. We talked for over an hour, the longest conversation we'd had since the confrontation. He told me about his therapy, his volunteer work, his struggles with guilt and shame. I told him about the legal aid organization, the people I was helping, how turning my pain into purpose had given me a sense of peace I hadn't expected. I know I'm not in your will anymore, he said toward the end of the call, and I understand why, but I want you to know that I think what you're doing with your estate is exactly right. Those people need help, and you have the resources to provide it. You're okay with it. I'm more than okay. I'm grateful that you found a way to make something good come from what I did to you. Before we hung up, I made a decision. Elias, I want you to know something. You're still my son. What you did was unforgivable in many ways, but you're working to be better, and that matters. I don't know if we'll ever have what we had before, but I'm willing to try to build something new. I'd like that, Mom. I'd like that more than anything. After the call, I sat on my porch watching the stars come out, thinking about forgiveness and consequences, justice and mercy. I hadn't changed my will, and I didn't plan to. The legal aid organization would still get everything when I died, but I could have a relationship with my son again, could acknowledge his efforts to change without rewarding his past crimes. It's been 5 years now since that rainy night when I couldn't find my hearing aid and overheard words that changed everything. The legal aid organization has grown significantly with the support I provide both financially and through volunteer work. We've helped over 200 victims recover assets and hold their exploiters accountable. I serve as the board president now, using my accounting skills and my personal story to guide our work. Elias finished his restitution payments last year, 3 years ahead of schedule. He works as a financial counselor for a nonprofit that helps people manage debt, using his understanding of exploitation to identify when clients are being taken advantage of. We talk every week now, sometimes more. Our relationship will never be what it was before, that innocence and unconditional trust is gone forever, but we've built something different, something perhaps more honest. He knows I'll never put him back in my will, and he doesn't ask. He knows I maintain strict boundaries around my finances, and he respects them. What he gives me instead is consistency, honesty, and evidence through his actions that he's become someone different from the man who tried to steal my life's work. Leora disappeared from our lives entirely. Last I heard, she'd moved to another state and was working as a real estate agent under a different name. Elias doesn't talk about her, and I don't ask. Marable has become one of my closest friends, checking on me daily, keeping me connected to the neighborhood, reminding me that trust, while risky, is still worth extending to the right people. The other board members at the legal aid organization have become like family, bound together by our shared commitment to protecting vulnerable people. Just last week, I gave a presentation at a senior center about recognizing financial exploitation. After the talk, an elderly man approached me with tears in his eyes. My daughter has been asking me to sign over power of attorney, he said. After hearing your story, I'm going to talk to a lawyer first, make sure I understand what I'm signing. That moment, knowing my painful experience might prevent someone else from going through the same thing, made everything worth it. The betrayal, the confrontation, the hard choices, all of it had led to this moment where I could help someone protect themselves. I still live in the same house, though it feels different now, lighter somehow. I've redecorated, making it truly mine instead of a space I shared with Elias and Leora. My bedroom is now a home office where I review cases and prepare presentations. The dining room where I confronted them is now a library, filled with books on elder law and financial planning. I've taken up gardening seriously, and my backyard has become a sanctuary of flowers and vegetables. Marable jokes that I'm trying to grow enough tomatoes to feed the entire neighborhood. She's not wrong. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that moment when I heard Leora say maybe it's a sign you should stop talking, when I felt the full weight of their contempt. But instead of that memory filling me with pain, I feel a strange gratitude. That moment woke me up, forced me to see the truth I'd been avoiding, pushed me to take action that not only saved my own assets but led to helping hundreds of others. My flaws, my obsessive nature and my stubborn pride, my tendency to trust too completely, and then, when betrayed, to dig in with absolute determination, those traits nearly destroyed me but also saved me. I learned to channel them into something productive, to use my perfectionism in service of justice rather than just balancing ledgers. The twist I never expected wasn't just that I'd change my will or that Elias would genuinely reform. It was that losing my family would lead to finding my purpose, that being forced to hear their betrayal would help me finally listen to my own strength. I adjusted my hearing aid this morning, the same one I'd lost all those years ago, and realized I'm grateful for every word I heard that night, because sometimes the most painful truths are the ones we most need to hear.